the maiden voyage.
All right, so kind of picking up where we left off, Josh. We kind of finished our talk, kind of talking about the kind of history of strength training and kind of stagnation points along the way, where we kind of start to see kind of like a plateauing of results.
Right.
And yeah, and now we're just kind of trying maybe kind of talk through some things as far as how do we keep the results coming, how do we prevent plateauing, and just being more specific in our workouts and our training.
Yep. So I think that there's a kind of a decent graph. I think we probably talked about it, but it's definitely worth kind of drawing for the audience here, just to kind of. So if we have. This is progress. This is time. So we obviously have early progress in the beginning. We start to plateau as we advance. So I think that this is something that kind of graphically represents what we're trying to.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think everybody probably agree with that. Whenever we first started working out, we would start to see we'd see crazy results from the beginning, and as we've been doing it for a while, we'd start to see just kind of like a leveling off and plateauing, and in at least in the CrossFit world, I'd be lucky to see a 5-pound PR, every year.
Right.
So just how do we keep the results coming to back when we were a beginner, when we were seeing 10 pounds of weight go on like every week. We might not be able to get that now, but we can at least bring the curve back to a higher slope angle.
Correct. Yeah, and so I think that the key. It sounds simple, but being more specific in our intent behind the training. So sometimes we can almost be too general. And while being general is great, there's a lot of positive benefits of being general. So whenever we think of being specific, it's like, okay, what do we mean? We need to actually have a goal in mind, and the goal behind each session or each training cycle should have some particular goal, and then we can use that goal then to drive the selection of exercises that we're trying to help achieve our goal.
Yeah. So then, kind of specific, kind of what you're talking about is like the SED principle.
Correct. Yeah. Specific adaptation to impose demands. So your body is basically going to crave the specificity. So it's always trying to get better. But at the same time, if you do bicep curls day one, but you don't do them for another week, there's going to be a lag in the tissue adaptation. So we want to keep the target in mind, if you will.
Yeah. So basically, our bodies will adapt specifically to the demands we kind of do it. So we are kind of what we habitually do.
Exactly.
And as we do that more often, our body will kind of like adapt and get used to that, and we're not going to adapt nearly as quick. So the idea is we need to bring ourselves back to being a beginner again.
Yeah, I think the challenge that we're kind of at is we see that we need to be specific. We see that we need certain aspects, but the problem winds up being that over time we wind up being in that plateau phase, even though we're trying to change exercises, we're trying to create different adaptations, but we kind of fall into this kind of we're making a little progress, but we're not making so much progress.
Yes. Okay, so how do we actually now, like, let's say we've been working out for 10 plus years. Like I said, we're lucky to see if we see a 5-pound PR once a year. How do we start getting ourselves back to seeing a higher rate of adaptation or getting more results more quickly?
Yeah, so we basically have to figure out where we're a beginner, where we're untrained. So we have to kind of, I mean, we can do an assessment, we can do it through various ways, but I feel like the key would be figuring out what areas, everyone has areas that they're good at. Everyone has areas that they like to train, but trying to find some of those areas that are less trained to be able to draw in some more tissue, to be able to then bring that to the things that we're already good at.
Okay, so kind of like as we get better at things, I guess as we get better at things, our body's gonna adapt and just kind of, I guess, get more efficient at that. So we're essentially taking our current biology, what we currently have, and we're making it as best as it can possibly do.
Correct.
So the only way to really kind of go forward from there would be essentially kind of like changing your biology. So like changing the actual physical structure of the athlete to then actually start bringing more results in from there.
Yep. And so we would think, training. We're adding biology by training, but it's not necessarily that cut and dry. We might need to be taking a little bit more of a different approach compared to, like, more squats aren't necessarily better. More deadlifts aren't necessarily better. More bench press isn't necessarily better. Because if you think of those particular exercises, they're going to have certain lines of tension, whereas a bench press, relatively fixed. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can do variations, but it's going to be a relatively fixed plane of motion. So we're not necessarily going to stress multiple lines of the pec muscle per se or the shoulder. It's going to be confined to what the barbell, dumbbell, kettlebell gives us. So drawing in more lines of tissue is going to be where we're able to see some of that positive adaptation, positive growth.
So just kind of getting more variability in our workouts.
Correct.
So kind of almost like you could say, kind of like shocking the system, just introducing a new way of working out to the body that's something that's not used to. Like I like the analogy. It's like swimming is a really great cardiovascular workout if you don't know how to swim. You throw somebody who doesn't know how to swim in a pool, they're going to struggle, they're going to be kicking, they're going to be flailing all around, they're going to get one heck of a workout. But you have them take swim lessons and you have them practice it for months on end, they're just going to get more efficient and it's not becoming actually less of a workout. So their body's actually just adapting to that and becoming more efficient. So
right.
How do we get progress from there? It's like changing the biology. So we talked kind of before, there's kind of four different, once we kind of get the most out of what our current biology is, we can then think about trying to maybe increase lean muscle mass to then put on more muscle mass, and then we can then essentially make that more efficient by strength training essentially with that. One of the things I think we had talked about is the like specifically how actually the change happens. So that graph as far as kind of like showing like overload principle and then supercompensation. So if we had like a graph here, and let's say this is kind of saying how much force we can produce, and we'll say time is right here, and we'll say we're starting somewhere right about here, and as we're actually going through the training process and actually the physical workout, we'll see a decrease in actually force production. We're essentially kind of like fatiguing our muscles out. That makes sense. And then as we kind of finish our workout and then kind of go through recovery, we're kind of hoping to see a slightly higher, our body will then compensate for the demand that we kind of put on it. So by going through a workout and sending the right signal to the body, and we'll kind of talk about that here in a second, our body's gonna be like, hey, we just dealt with something that we can't really deal with very well, so our body's gonna adapt and it's gonna recover, and we should see, hopefully, our body improve and get to that. And then we actually, when we first are starting working out, we're gonna see this pretty regularly. It's just now, as time progresses with our more advanced athletes, we start to see this plateauing effect, and we kind of lose this kind of super compensation.
Yeah, and we might even see that part of the graph, instead of peaking at a certain height, it might actually peak a little bit less. But like getting back to the initial part of the graph, so the shock is the key. So that initial shock has to be something new, has to be something different. And then from there, then we actually have to recover. So the key, which we're going to talk about maybe some other time, is that whole recovery process to then get to that higher peak. But the other little piece to that I wanted to bring into, by stressing the system then has to figure out how to get better. Mm-hmm. So, we might train, if we're training hypertrophy, we might actually be trying to train to failure, because the signal of not being able to contract the muscle anymore is the signal that the brain then uses to say, the next time we do this lift, we're going to need more force production because we've exceeded, or we've at least met the amount of force production at this particular time. So the compensation that we're trying to get to, that super compensation, is the next time we lift 100 pounds, we're able to produce more force.
So kind of what you're saying is, for hypertrophy, like for trying to get bigger, make our athletes bigger, by taking a workout essentially to failure, and truly to failure, when the body ends up saying, hey, we're not able to deal with this, so how do we deal with this? Well, we need to give you more muscle in order to be able to deal with the stress that you're putting on.
Correct.
Our bodies are incredibly adaptable, so...
Yeah. So like the first 6 weeks, this kind of gets back to the beginner, we're going to see a lot of neurological adaptations first. But after that 6-week period, if we keep the stimulus going, then that's whenever we truly get to those biological changes. So the advanced lifter, their nervous system is well developed, but it still requires a shock to the system. It still requires an effort that is near their max or absolute.
Yeah, because when you're a beginner, I mean, everything is new to you. So
yeah.
Your body's like, you can literally just tap your head several times and you actually just get better, just because it's something so new to your body. It really doesn't have to be that specific. Your body's going to change just because, like I said, it's just something incredibly new. And I don't think anybody would probably disagree with that.
Right.
But yeah, when we get into more of those well-trained athletes, it's definitely much tougher, and we have to be more intentional in the signal that we're sending. Mm-hmm. So we have kind of like 3 different areas of training. We've got a stimulating effect.
Yep. We've
got retraining, and we've got detraining.
Yep.
So a stimulating effect would be something if new to working out, we're just going to experience just pretty much almost all the time, because it's something new. It's something, a new signal. Basically, by going through these new exercises, it's something that our biology has never encountered before. So that basically tells our brain, sends a signal to the brain, and then we adapt accordingly.
Right.
But as we're been doing this for a while, it's by not being specific enough, we end up spending more time in that retraining zone.
Yep. It becomes that muddy middle where it's maybe not so high, maybe not so low. It's just kind of fluctuates.
And even though we we still like a lot of times we still feel like we're working out, like we're working out really hard and we're super gassed, especially in the CrossFit world, like especially with the high intensity workouts.
Yep.
I mean, to say that they're not putting enough effort into it seems not really fair.
But that's the distinction. We tend to lump effort and intensity together as the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But really, whenever we say effort, we probably are truly meaning intensity. So like to be like if we're talking max strength or going for strength, we need to be in that 90 to 100% of your 1 rep max. So you could be working at 80%, feel like you're putting out a lot of effort, but if you're not in that 90+%, you're actually not sending the correct signal for the outcome that you are desiring. So if strength is the goal and you're not at that 90% plus percentage, you can put a lot of effort into the training, but it's not creating the stimulus that we're actually after.
Okay. Yeah, so like I said before, early on in working out in our exercise journey, we're constantly kind of hitting that stimulating effect, and our body's going to then super compensate and adapt to that. And then as we get more advanced and have been working out for a while, we kind of lose that effect. We kind of ended up spending most of our time in that, like I said, that retraining zone. But there's also the kind of that detraining zone, and it sounds kind of weird, but that's kind of, I would say that's more kind of that recovery zone where I guess it really depends on the workout that you're going through, but it's going to be important not to kind of like send also then conflating signals that are going to kind of counteract that. So, and that kind of maybe gets into like the overtraining. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that let's say our goal is strength training for lower body, like a back squat. Mm-hmm. If we go through like a max effort, some close to max effort, we send the signal, but by then, let's say the next day, would it be a good idea to then try to go max effort on lower body pull, or do you want to avoid lower body altogether, or is there some way we can still kind of work out without like essentially affecting that kind of super compensation? Because on average it's probably for like recovery we're looking about something like 48 hours ish,
upwards of 72. Yeah. I would say if your max effort is going to be dedicated to a squat, you're not going to want to max effort in the same week on another lower body lift. Mm-hmm. That, say on Monday you max effort for the back squat, your Thursday might be a similar workout, but the volume will be less.
Yes.
But you're not going to want to do multiple max efforts throughout the week. So even though you did, say, the squat on Monday, you can still deadlift, you can still do other lower body exercises, but they would be more accessory or like supplementing type and exercises.
Just kind of keeping the intensity a little bit lower, trying to keep it in more of that...
you would be in the retraining.
The retraining, yeah. Detraining zone.
Correct.
Yes.
And this goes back to the specificity. So we only have a certain amount of resources, a certain amount of energy. So we're not able to peak everything all the time. We have to be able to kind of turn the dial up on the squat and just maintain the deadlift or the other lower body qualities. And then once we get the squat to where we need it to be, then we can dial up other lifts. So we kind of have to constantly be juggling to either maintain or improve, but we can't let one completely fall off. So
I think yeah, this keeps going back to the specificity and the intention in our workouts. We just kind of got to know where we're dumping our energy into.
Correct. Yeah.
And know what our goal is. If our goal is strength, if our goal is hypertrophy, if our goal is endurance, knowing what the goal is, we just have to be a little bit more specific. It's as we the longer we've been working out, the more we've been training. Unfortunately, we just have to get a little bit more specific, and we have to be more intentional in order to keep the results coming. At least to bring us back to seeing a higher rate of return.
Right. So I think that we've talked about. So there's 4 basically ways to train, if you will. So we have our max effort, which is going to be how we produce strength. We have our dynamic effort, which is really how we produce speed. We have our repeated efforts, and we can do repeated efforts not to failure, which is more of our efficiency. Then we have our repeated efforts to failure, which is going to be where we get our hypertrophy. And so we can mix and match throughout the session of like what we're going to target. So if again our squat is our max effort, we can still be doing different components throughout the rest of the workout.
Okay, so maximal strength. Let's kind of touch on that. So I know we've talked before, kind of like kind of the difference between maximal strength and then absolute strength.
Yep.
So absolute strength, if I'm not mistaken, is basically if we were to wire our muscles up and get a readout as far as if we were to be able to contract everything our current biology is capable of, all of our muscles are able of contracting force production, that would give us our absolute strength. And then our maximal strength is just kind of currently what our current ability level is able to do.
Yeah, that would the max strength would be what we have access to. The absolute strength would be the maximal amount of force production that our current biology has available.
Yeah, and like so as a beginner when you're first starting out, you're going to have a much bigger gap between your absolute strength and your maximal strength.
Correct.
Now, as you've been working out, and the more advanced athlete, we're going to see a much narrowing of that gap because, our neurology is going to come into play. You want to touch on that?
Yeah. So, the neurology is, think of that as like a neural net, and I know that sounds a little abstract, but the ability for us to create force is proportional to how much neurologic drive we have to that particular tissue.
Okay, so I think what you're trying to say is that when we're new to working out, we really don't have much brain muscle connection.
Yes.
So as we become more experienced, we get more brain muscle connection, and then we can actually get more output out of those muscles just because we're able to basically signal those muscles better and get more force production.
Yeah, so I mean, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but there are definitely some research studies done about mindfulness and like pre-planning the movement that you're doing,
mm-hmm.
and then by like almost running through it in your mind, you're actually able to harness more neurological output than if you were just to go, I'm going to go do a squat, and you just go do it. But if you almost like, and you'll see, really good athletes, they'll be kind of getting themselves ready for the lift. And part of that, yes, they're ramping up their nervous system as far as like their ability to produce force, but they're also rehearsing it in their mind, which is tapping in to more of those connections like you're talking about.
Okay. So yeah, we kind of talked about absolute strength, maximal strength. You talked about kind of that dynamic effort.
Yeah, that's our speed component. So that would be trying to, again, harness the speed of contraction and how much rate of force development, like how fast can we use the nervous system to create the contraction. And so, the best athletes in the world have the highest rate of force development. I mean, if you took Michael Jordan whenever he did his famous, dunk in the dunk contest, and if we were able to have a force plate at the free throw line, whenever he put force into the ground, you would see this huge spike. And so the ability to create force at a fast rate, same thing with like world long drive and golf, their ability to create force, but the peak of their force is like just ridiculously high. It doesn't take them a long time to get there. Another example would be George St. Pierre. There's some research done with like his striking ability, and so it's actually termed like the double pulse. So he'll create a contraction, he'll almost relax a little bit, and then he'll create the rest of the contraction. So the speed of contraction is important, but actually the best athletes in the world have the ability to relax just as fast.
Maybe a little off topic, but I remember hearing kind of like this interview with George St. Pierre, and like back when he was he was a UFC fighter, for those who don't know.
Right.
And he had some pretty epic battles with one of my favorite mixed martial arts of all time, BJ Penn. And one of the things he had found was that, touch on that, but like just by throwing like more feints and like I guess probably like a double effect as far as kind of ramping up his nervous system, like doing that pulse you kind of just talked about. But like by throwing in more feints, it's basically it forces the other athlete to just kind of react, and then just over time your body can only like handle so much like nervous system load that it kind of almost like desensitizes when it kind of slows the reaction time down. Yeah, it's like you can work harder and you can work longer, but you can't do both.
Correct. Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Anyways. And then also, so then we have repeated efforts like not to failure. Mm-hmm. So that would be basically... Just go ahead.
And honestly, that's where a lot of our workouts tend to kind of focus. That's more of the efficiency kind of point.
So like fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. We kind of really have two different camps we can be working in. We can make it work on being better at our like fast twitch contractions, mm-hmm. or we'd be better at working at our slow twitch. Mm-hmm. It really just kind of depends on the intensity and then the duration, right?
Correct. Yeah. Our slow twitch, we think of like marathon runners or those like cardio type events. But if you're doing say 20 reps of a squat, you're gonna bias maybe a few more of those slow twitch fibers than you would of those fast twitch whenever you're doing say 90% at 3 reps.
Yeah, we're currently in a here at our gym. We're currently in a 20 rep back squat program right now. So
that can be brutal.
Yes. Also, then we have repeated efforts to failure, and then repeated and then that we also then kind of have two different camps: fast twitch and slow twitch. Again, mm-hmm. It really depends, like I said, on the intensity or the weight. I don't like to say weight too much because focusing too much on weight, we may not end up sending the signal that we actually end up wanting to. It's really the intensity of that. So truly taking if we're going after fast switch to failure, and that's going to be something like under 30 seconds.
Yeah, total time. Yeah, we would don't want to keep that relatively short.
And if you think about it, like our classic rep scheme in working out is, for the most part, if we're training, we kind of maybe we've heard of, at least I know and been doing this while, like is kind of like that 8 to 12 reps was kind of like 8 to 15 reps was kind of like that hypertrophy zone. But then there's also people say like those like burnout sets, and I think neither of which are wrong. It's just one's kind of going after fast twitch, one's going to be going after slow twitch. Yeah, so like that 8 to 12 reps is if you kind of like, you say like maybe 2 to 3 seconds kind of per rep, we kind of see that we're kind of falling somewhere in that under, 12 to 30 second time duration.
Right.
And we're looking to hit failure. If we hit failure within that 8 to 12 reps, that 12 to 30-ish seconds, and we truly hit failure, we're really going to be working on telling our body to, hey, we're going to put on more fast twitch muscle fibers.
Correct. So if our goal is 8 to 12 reps, the next goal is we have to find a weight that we fail in those 8 to 12 reps. So most of the time, the weight is probably too light. So we wind up not being, to your point, as intense. And so if you're struggling and you're like, oh, at 8, I feel okay. I might be able to get 10. But it's like, how many could you still do if I said, I need you to do 15 or 20? And you probably would be like, yeah, I probably could get another 2. So then there's a concept called reps in reserve. And so reps in reserve is I do 20, but I probably could do 23. And so you left three in reserve, which brings you more into that not to failure zone versus to if I had to do one more rep, my muscles say I can't.
So kind of like that, like end up being, spend most of the time in that retraining zone.
Correct, because even though our intent, we said we're going to do 2 failure, we picked 8 to 12 reps, but then if I really asked you to be honest, could you do 3 more reps? And you said, yeah, probably. Then you probably weren't in the true zone that we're intending to be at.
Yeah. Yeah, then we also have like, slow twitch to failure, which is basically just anything kind of like 60 plus seconds.
Right, long
kind
term.
of more of those like 20-ish kind of reps. It kind of really depends on just time under tension.
Right, longer or higher tempos, or higher by higher I mean drawn out tempos where you're doing like a 2-0, 2-0.
Personally, I think those are probably the worst, just because it's so much time under tension, and it's absolutely, because you also just it's more, I think, more of a mental struggle, just because like in order to truly hit failure and truly then send the correct signal so we get that super compensation to actually then get send the appropriate signal to then actually get slow twitch hypertrophy. Honestly, I think those are like the worst type of workouts for me.
Yeah, an interesting thing. So we see, if we ask someone to do a slow controlled rep of something, and we might see this like shakiness, where it's not as smooth as we would like it.
Does tempo matter on that?
Does tempo matter in what?
In, let's say, like the duration, the time under tension. So like, let's say most people think slow twitch, it's do I need to be going like 10 seconds down, 10 seconds up? Is the tempo necessarily going to be important as far as if I want to get more muscle mass, or then conversely, for fast twitch, it's like, do I need to be going super quick, or is it really just the total time under tension?
There's probably arguments in both camps. I would say the tempo definitely has a component, because like if we're trying to create fast twitch, we think fast, but technically we're trying to just produce the most force. So even though the goal is fast twitch, we might not be moving fast per se.
Yes.
So the tempo doesn't need to be like quick per se. That now is the speed component. So different training. But then there is a component of slow twitch that we would want to slow down the tempo just a touch, where again, the tempo gives us the time under tension. It helps us. So the long story to the long answer is really, we want the tempo to then bring us to a certain time. So it's a roundabout way of saying, yes, the time under tension is really the goal. We have to pick the right time under tension.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then so kind of bringing this back, once we've kind of trying to get back to this beginner. So once we've kind of, if we take my current body composition, once I've kind of gotten the most out of what I currently have,
Yep.
it's then, how do I get results from there? I think I got to look, how do I change my biology, then to maybe give myself more muscle mass, whether maybe give myself more connective tissue or joint space. We'll talk about that another time. But basically changing the physical structure of the athlete, and then kind of going back to that absolute strength, maximal strength. As we've been working out, when we first started working out, we had that big gap.
Right.
And then as we've been working out for a while, we kind of bridge that gap. Now, in order to essentially give us that gap to bring us back to like a beginner state, we're gonna have to change our biology.
Yep.
And then we just kind of constantly just change our biology, bridge that gap, change our biology, bridge that gap. And how do we do that? It's just by essentially training new areas,
Yep.
in a sense.
Yep.
And then also truly being intentional and making sure we're sending the right signal.
Correct. Yeah.
To get the results.
Like, this is definitely a topic for additional conversation, but the connective tissue that surrounds each muscle fiber, which then surrounds bundles of fibers, which surrounds the entire muscle. So the connective tissue ensheathes the entire muscle. It's like saran wrap. Think of it as like you've got some ground beef and you're wrapping it up in saran wrap. So if we can give you more space to then fill in with muscle, that would be potentially an area to look at. Like I said, we'll get to that maybe at another time, but that's something to think about. So that person that is in that advanced stage, have they filled their scaffolding with as much muscle as possible, and now they need more room to build more muscle? That's maybe a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And then also like range of motion. Actually, maybe we can, before we talk about that, so kind of going back to, this makes me think, what I was going to say before that is also then just improving range of motion. So if we can improve range of motion, also joint space, if we might be limited in as far as how much range of motion we have, how far we can, how much depth we can get in our squat.
Right.
Just by increasing range of motion, we can then essentially open up more tissue, trainable tissue.
Right. Well, if you think about it in another way.
So that would be giving somebody something new as well.
Correct. So the range of motion, if it's a longer range of motion, technically there's more time. So there's more mechanical tension that can be into the tissue. So if we can extend out the contraction over a longer period of time, we actually can get more stimulus into the tissue. So the range of motion allows for larger amounts of stimulation to the tissue. Because if we're just working a short range, we're only working a finite amount of the fibers.
Yes.
But as we open up the range, we're going to draw in more fibers to that particular exercise. So the more fibers we can pull into the exercise, the more biology, the higher our ability to produce force.
And also that makes me think about too, bringing something new to the table. We can also then just slightly change, like even like our range of motion. Like a lot of times we get locked in a certain foot position for our back squat, front squat, overhead squat. But if we keep our feet in that same position, we're going to work kind of like those same lines of tension, so we can actually get more by changing up our stance, increasing width, narrowing stance, changing angles a little bit. We can essentially bring something new to the table, and that can also help us.
Correct, because I think we hear back squat, and everyone that hears the word back squat has a preconceived idea of what a back squat is. Your old high school coach, they instilled certain ideas. Maybe you have a trainer now, they're putting in their ideas. While there are certain parameters as far as form that we need to abide by, changing foot flare, changing stance width is going to allow for more tissue to be influenced. And if we can influence a wider range of tissue, we can bring more tissue to that particular exercise. So I think it's sometimes we think of exercises that need to be done in a very particular way, but if we can expand the shape of what the exercise looks like, we're able to, because muscles aren't two-dimensional, they're three-dimensional. So the shape of the muscle, we need to think of it in a little bit wider lens.
So if I do a bicep curl like this, and that's all I do bicep curls, I don't think anybody would probably disagree. If I do bicep curls like this, if I only did that, it's going to look different than if I did a bicep curl like this. And if I just really try to develop my muscles, I did one this way, if I did one this way, we're going to see that muscle develop differently. We're just working different lines of tension.
Correct. Yeah, adding in pronation, supination, or just some wrist movement is going to change the directionality of the tissue. So it's going to add more variability into the...
Hey, constantly varied. You're speaking my language.
That's right.
Yeah. So basically kind of what we're trying to say is, in order to get ourselves back to that higher slope rate, to kind of when we were a beginner and we saw crazy rates of adaptation and just results, we have to bring something new to the table. We have to be a little bit more intentional and specific, and we do it as we've been working out longer. And a lot of the times we think we're kind of there, but we're not truly sending us basically a strong enough signal to whatever our goal is, whether it be maximal strength, whether it might be hypertrophy. Just for doing it long enough, our body's going to accommodate, and our results are going to taper off.
Yeah, so accommodation, that's an interesting word. Accommodation basically means efficiency to a certain extent. So the more you do something, the more efficient eventually you will get. And so this goes back to your swimming analogy. So the new swimmer, it's inefficient. So he's burning more calories, or they're using a lot more effort to do the activity. So the goal in training is basically never to accommodate.
Yes.
So while we want, like certain lifts have more skill involved, and we need to be a little bit more dialed into the technique, but at the same time, we need to basically become inefficient to a certain extent and never truly get super comfortable with the particular lift. So we're always trying to fight for the path of most resistance, like we sometimes will say. We're trying to always, there's going to be a bit of struggle. So like, if you feel like, the exercise is just easy, easy is not necessarily a bad thing, but we want there to be a little bit of that struggle, because that struggle leads to that shock to the system, which will help again train that potential supercompensation.
Yeah, just bringing ourselves back to that beginner's mind, not mindset, but that new beginning. Anything else we were wanting to?
I mean, I think intentionality of training, intent of what you're trying to achieve, and then just being more specific. The specificity is ultimately what it comes down to. I think that the more specific we can be, sometimes we can get lost in the weeds as far as details go, but I feel like this is where having a good coach comes into play. Because sometimes we like to program for ourselves, and we wind up maybe not.
Yeah, we end up doing the thing. We kind of just somehow kind of move towards the things we're good at.
Exactly.
And kind of veer away from the things we're bad at.
Correct. So
yeah.
I think having a coach to guide us through the process is going to be important to make sure, one, we're achieving our goals, and two, making sure that the intent is where it needs to be for each and every workout.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I think that concludes.
Yeah. All right. Join us next time.
Yep, we'll see you again.